Imagine this. A young woman walks onto a military airbase carrying not just the weight of her uniform but also the burden of centuries-old expectations. A place where tradition and hierarchy often overshadow talent and merit. The video title tells us everything. The Admiral kicked her off base, then froze. When her F-22 call sign made every SEAL salute, at first glance it reads like a simple tale of disrespect met with vindication. But the truth buried within is far more systemic, far more unsettling, and far more revealing of the hidden fractures inside the culture of power and command. Why would an admiral, a man entrusted with absolute authority over one of the most disciplined environments in the world, feel compelled to dismiss her presence? Was it personal bias, a test of loyalty, or a reflex rooted in the old military code that still lingers in the shadows of progress? And how could a single call sign, tied to her reputation as an F-22 pilot, reverse not just the decision but the entire room's perception of her, commanding instant respect from Navy SEALs who operate at the very top of America's defense apparatus? This is not just a story about pride or recognition. It is a forensic case study in power dynamics, gender politics, military identity, and the invisible lines between personal authority and earned honor. What we are about to unravel is a tale that begins with humiliation, spirals into confrontation, and explodes into a moment that forces even the most unshakable men to confront their own assumptions. And as we dissect it piece by piece, you will see that this is more than just a dramatic clash. It's a mirror reflecting the unspoken codes of respect, the weight of reputations forged in combat skies, and the unstoppable force of truth when it collides with power. And this is where the conflict takes shape, because beneath the surface of that dramatic moment lies a deeper tension that has long defined the invisible battlefields inside the armed forces, the struggle between authority imposed by rank and authority earned through action. When the Admiral kicked her off base, it wasn't just a matter of removing one individual. It symbolized the dismissal of a voice, a presence, and a record that challenged the very traditions he was sworn to uphold. She represented something larger than herself, an officer whose combat record and call sign told a story of near-impossible missions flown under the radar, where failure was never an option and where she had delivered results time and time again. But in the rigid hierarchy of military command, titles often blind those in power to the substance of the people beneath them, and what should have been a simple acknowledgement of merit instead became an eruption of ego. The moral conflict at the heart of this case study is not simply about gender or respect, though both are threads woven tightly into the fabric. It is about the structural arrogance that can grow in institutions built on deference to authority. The Admiral saw her as a disruption, someone who did not fit the mold he believed should command attention. And yet the Navy SEALs, hardened men who had lived and bled by a different code, recognized something the Admiral could not, or perhaps refused to. Their salute wasn't a gesture of courtesy. It was a statement, a defiance, an acknowledgement that in the unforgiving reality of combat, respect cannot be given by order. It can only be earned. Here lies the conflict, the clash between the old system that measures worth by protocol and the lived reality of those who know that survival and victory demand a different kind of loyalty, one forged by courage in the face of fire. But the real turning point was the moment her identity, stripped away by dismissal, was suddenly reinstated not by a superior officer's mercy but by the raw weight of her reputation, crystallized in a single F-22 call sign that carried more history than anyone in that room was prepared to face. Until then, she had been reduced to just another officer, an easily expendable presence in the Admiral's eyes. But when the whispers began to ripple through the ranks and the SEALs caught wind of who she truly was, the atmosphere shifted with almost cinematic precision. Call signs in the aviation world are not just nicknames. They are battle-forged seals of authenticity, earned in the crucible of missions that test the limits of both machine and pilot. Hers wasn't an ordinary call sign. It was one that had become legendary, whispered in after-action reports, invoked in training simulations, studied by strategists who understood the difference between textbook maneuvers and the kind of improvisational brilliance that saves lives when everything goes wrong. The Admiral's authority, absolute in structure but brittle in substance, collided head-on with the unwritten law that binds warriors together. Respect for those who have proven themselves where others faltered. It was as though the room itself transformed. The Admiral's command faded into irrelevance as the SEALs rose, their salutes cutting through the tension like blades, not out of obligation but out of recognition. This was the irreversible moment, the fracture in the Admiral's control that could never be repaired, because once truth is revealed in such stark clarity, no amount of orders, reprimands, or intimidation can erase it. From that point on, the narrative was no longer his to control. It belonged to her, to the legend tied to her call sign, and to the men who acknowledged her not because they had to, but because in the unspoken brotherhood of combat, she had already earned it 100 times over. And the climax came crashing down like a storm breaking over the horizon, a moment so sharp and undeniable that even the most ironclad chain of command could not contain it. Because when every Navy SEAL in that room rose in unison and delivered a salute to her call sign, it wasn't just an act of respect, it was an outright declaration that the Admiral's authority had been eclipsed by something far greater. The weight of silence afterward was deafening, the kind of silence that swallows an entire room when the power dynamic flips without warning, when a single individual, cast aside only moments before, suddenly stands at the epicenter of collective acknowledgement. The Admiral, frozen in place, could not undo what had just unfolded before his eyes, because his carefully curated image of dominance had been shattered by a truth too large to suppress. In the hierarchy of combat credibility, lived experience outstrips formal authority every single time. This was not simply about her triumph over one man's arrogance. It was about the entire institution witnessing a public unraveling of protocol. A moment when the rigid scaffolding of rank gave way to the raw authenticity of proven skill and sacrifice. Every salute from those SEALs was heavy with the weight of battles fought, lives saved, and missions accomplished, echoing through the walls of that base as an indictment of the Admiral's blindness and an affirmation of her undeniable place within their world. For the first time, the very system designed to silence her had instead amplified her, turning an act of dismissal into a stage 4 revelation. And in that instant, she was no longer a target of disrespect, she was the embodiment of a truth no one in uniform could deny. Real honor cannot be ordered, only earned, and once earned, it commands allegiance from even the most unshakable warriors. And the conclusion becomes clear when we step back and examine the deeper moral architecture of this case. Because it is not merely the story of one admiral's mistake or one pilot's vindication. It is a study of how institutions wrestle with the tension between tradition and transformation, between the authority granted by rank and the authority earned by action. What her experience reveals is that the military, for all its rigid codes and rituals, is still bound at its core by a universal truth. When lives are on the line, people follow competence, not titles. Her call sign was more than a label. It was a record etched in the skies, a reminder that courage, precision, and sacrifice cannot be erased by a dismissive gesture from above. The SEAL's salute was not just symbolic, it was proof that the highest measure of respect is conferred only by those who have stood at the edge of chaos and recognized a kindred spirit who has done the same. And so the larger takeaway is as simple as it is profound. In every system, whether military or civilian, power without legitimacy crumbles, while legitimacy born of action endures beyond any official order. The Admiral may have held the rank, but she held the truth, and in the long arc of history, truth outlasts authority every time. This tale, when stripped down to its essence, is a mirror held up not only to the armed forces but to all of us, showing that respect, once earned through trial and sacrifice, carries a weight no institution can deny, and that recognition, once given freely, can reshape the very culture it touches. And this brings us to the call to action. Because if this investigation into power, respect, and truth has shown us anything, it's that stories like this are not just about the past, they're about how we choose to recognize courage and integrity in our own lives today. The Admiral's mistake and her vindication remind us that authority without honor collapses, but honor without authority still commands allegiance. And that is a lesson worth carrying beyond the walls of any military base. If you want to see more hidden truths dissected and exposed with the rigor they demand, then make sure you subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button to push this investigation further. Tap the notification bell so you never miss the next case study, and leave a comment below sharing your own thoughts on what true respect